Everybody, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our webinar on LEAP Science Prep. We're going to be getting started here in just a minute or two just to give some people a chance to arrive if they are not already here. In the meantime, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves in the chat, it's always nice to see who's here and what you do and where you're from. Just make sure that you switch it to everyone rather than to just two hosts and panelists. So that way everybody can see where you're from. And don't worry, we will be returning the favor and we will be introducing ourselves here shortly as well. So like I mentioned, we'll get started here in just a minute or so and we'll get started. It's a big weekend coming up, you two. It's Valentine's Day. Do y'all have any plans?
I don't have any specific plans. Well, we always end up doing something. So we'll see what happens on Saturday. Probably a little date. What about you, Julia?
I'm very eager to maybe having a baby this weekend. I'm tired of being pregnant. So hopefully that happens on the 15th, not on the 14th, so he can have his own day. What about you, Emily?
I will be sending magical baby dust your way this weekend. No big plans. We're probably just gonna do like a cozy night in. We like it always like gets to Valentine's Day and we're like, should we do something? And then it's like, do you want to just like wear pajamas and order in and like watch a movie? That's usually like where we wind up. All right. Well, I think we should go ahead and get cooking here. So hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our webinar on LEAP Science Prep, 3D item analysis and strategies for student readiness. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves in the chat. We'll go ahead and return the favor and introduce ourselves. So my name is Emily Miller. My pronouns are she, her. Prior to coming to Inner Orbit, I was a high school chemistry teacher for 10 years up here in Minnesota. I taught in our alternative learning program. I taught regular chem, honors chem, so lots of ways to teach a lot of kids a lot of different ways. I worked a lot with the NGSS during that time in the classroom, as well as getting to be a PLC lead. And now I have the joy of partnering with districts to help them implement Inner Orbit. And like I mentioned, I think my Valentine's Day plans this weekend is just like a cozy night in. Maybe like order in some sushi, watch a movie. I'm looking forward to it. And I'll pass it off to Julia.
Thank you, Emily. So my name is Julia Mota. I was a teacher and a tutor for elementary students in the Dominican Republic for a little bit. And then I started supporting teachers and districts with their NGSS implementation. Now I've been with Inner Orbit for the past 4 years. Now I have the joy of partnering and guiding schools and districts implementing assessments in their NGSS instruction. And something about Valentine's Day is that I love me a good Galentine's brunch is my favorite thing about Valentine's Day. I think everyone should do it. And then over to Daniel. I'll be in the chat just answering questions if you have any.
Everyone, my name is Daniel Jackson. I was previously a curriculum director, high school biology and middle school science teacher for 11 years in education. I taught at an international school in Colombia, was a global education and Fulbright TGC scholar in Morocco, and I currently partner with school leaders and teachers new to Inner Orbit. And for Valentine's Day, I didn't like it growing up, but I just recently started liking it after getting married, so maybe that changes it a little bit. But all right, let's go over the agenda for today. Our goal is to cover the structure and the expectations of the LEAP science tests, be able to identify the NGSS dimensions within test items, and learn how scaffolded formative assessments can support students' progression towards competently answering 3D phenomena-based questions. We'll be together for about 45 minutes. First, I'll give an overview of Inner Orbit. Next, I'll cover the shift to sense making and talk through assessments that align with LEAP science tests. From there, we will go over the LEAP structure and item analysis, along with examples of scaffolded formatives from Inner Orbit that can help teachers prepare students for these exams. And we will also provide a helpful classroom resource for phenomena-based questions towards the end. And the wise Yoda once said, do or do not, there is no try. So let's get this webinar started. All right, I'll begin with a quick introduction to what Inner Orbit is and how it supports educators. At Inner Orbit, we like to say there are 3 core components to what we do. We have phenomena, we have assessments, and we have detailed reports. Our high integrity 3D assessments at Inner Orbit are designed to provide meaningful and actionable student data so educators can make informed instructional decisions with confidence. We also make the NGSS accessible for both you and your students through innovative approaches to sense making. That means we don't just drop students straight into these complex 3D questions. Instead, we use scaffolded prompts that move students from more basic, one-dimensional content-focused understanding towards those larger three-dimensional questions, which we'll talk about in just a bit. And in addition to the questions themselves, we also provide supporting activities you can use with your students to help build those that understanding over time, so they're prepared and confident when they reach those more rigorous summative assessments later on, such as on the LEAP. We also provide guidance, supporting resources, and professional development to help you reach your NGSS goals, just like the session we're doing today. There will be a link dropped in the chat in just a moment. If you're interested in learning more about Inner Orbit, feel free to reach to fill out the interest form, and from there, we'll share additional information and show you how you can all try Inner Orbit within your districts. Next, I want to talk about the shift to sense making in regards to how we can interpret proficiency when prepping for the LEAP science test. If you've been teaching for years, you've probably felt this huge shift already. Proficiency has moved from standards that often focused on isolated facts, content, or skills to performance expectations that describe what students should actually be able to do to demonstrate understanding. Under the NGSS, proficiency is defined by sense making, which is when students integrate the three dimensions to explain phenomena and solve problems, not just recall information. Let's now take a look at what those three dimensions of the NGSS are. And as you may know, the three dimensions are what sit at the heart of the NGSS. First, we have the disciplinary core ideas. These are the content, the science that the students are learning. In this example, the DCI we're focusing on is adaptation. Students need to understand that in a given habitat, some organisms survive well, some survive less well, and some don't survive at all. That understanding is a critical part of the content students are expected to learn, although on its own, that kind of recall is no longer sufficient to say a student is proficient. The second dimension is the science and engineering practices. This is what students are actually doing with the science. Practices include things like constructing arguments, analyzing data, and developing or using models. In other words, thinking and acting like scientists. In this performance expectation, students are asked to engage in argument from evidence, meaning they must construct a claim and support it with evidence based on what they learned about adaptation. And finally, we have the cross-cutting concepts. These are the big ideas that are connected across scientific disciplines. They shape how students think about science. Examples include patterns, systems, and cause and effect. In this example, the cross-cutting concept is cause and effect. Students need to reason through how certain traits or conditions in a habitat cause some organisms to survive better than others. When all three of these dimensions come together, we get a much clearer picture of what students truly understand. We're no longer just measuring what they can memorize, we're assessing how they think, reason, and apply their knowledge. And that's the key difference with three-dimensional sense-making focused assessments. Next, let's talk a little bit more about sense-making. So when we say sense-making, we're talking about what happens when students pull together everything they already know, their ideas, their skills, and their experiences to make sense of something they don't fully understand yet. That process usually begins with a phenomena that's puzzling and raises questions. From there, students might use science and engineering practices to investigate. Maybe they ask questions, analyze data, or construct explanations, while at the same time drawing on disciplinary core ideas and cross-cutting concepts. And as we see in the image, sense-making isn't meant to be linear. Students won't always move step by step in a straight line. Instead, they can move back and forth between practices, content, and cross-cutting concepts as they refine their understanding. Rather than jumping straight to the right answer, they're working to figure out why something is happening. They're testing ideas, revising their thinking, and asking better questions along the way. That's really what the NGSS is aiming for, and what we believe strong assessments and strong instruction should be designed to support. Students that show proficiency are able to bring all these pieces together to make sense of new or novel scenarios. Now that we've gone over sense making, I'll pass it over to Emily to show you how sense making is incorporated into the LEAP science test.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's always nice just to get that little refresher of some of those key NGSS components and the three dimensions and sense making, so we can kind of apply that same lens to how the LEAP is written and how the items work. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is, as you may know, the LEAP is given across a lot of different grade levels. So I'm first going to focus on the LEAP for grades 3 through 8, and then I'll talk about the high school biology exam. So when looking at the grades 3 through 8 test, these tests are going to be on all content areas. So there's going to be questions about biology, physical science, and earth and space science. There's going to be about 2 to 3 sessions. So grades 3 and 4 will only have 2 sessions, where grades 5 through 8 are going to have 3 sessions within the test. While they're taking the test, it's going to be on the computer, and there's going to be a lot of different types of questions. For example, there's going to be multiple choice, multi-select. TPI and TPD stand for two-part independent and two-part dependent. So it's essentially a 2-part question. A two-part independent means that the student could get the first part wrong, but still get the second part right. Two-part dependent means they have to get the first part right in order to get the second part right as well. TEI stands for a tech-enhanced item. So that would be like drawing on a graph or dragging and dropping different elements. CR stands for constructed response, and ER stands for extended response. So these are all different types of questions that students could experience while on the LEAP. As you're looking at this table here, it's going to mention item sets. So these item sets are actually phenomena clusters. So there's going to be a phenomena that students are going to be looking at graphs, pictures, images, and then there's going to be multiple questions about that same phenomena. So students are going to need to answer questions and continuously refer back to the same phenomena within those item sets. Where the standalone items is just one question, usually still about a phenomena or a real world event, but the questions are not going to build onto each other after that. Now, when we're talking about the high school biology, there are some similarities, but there's also some differences. First of all, the high school test is just biology. So it's just going to be life science content. So no physical science and no earth and space. This test is going to have 3 sessions, and it's also going to have the same types of questions. So multiple choice, multi-select, 2-part questions, tech-enhanced items, constructed response, and extended response. It's still going to have item sets that are going to be centered around a phenomena, and it's going to have some standalone items as well. So as you can see here, there are 3 sessions. So this is going to be a little bit longer. Totaling an allotted 4 hours for students to take the entire exam. One thing I want to point out here is the LEAP high school test is going to have reporting categories. So it's going to let educators know how students did on investigative, evaluate, and reason scientifically sections on the LEAP. What I want to point out is through a NGSS dimension lens, these are actually grouped by the SCPs. So for example, if students are doing well or poorly on the investigate, that is tied to the SCPs of asking questions, defining problems, and planning investigations. If students are doing well or need more support with the evaluate category, that has to do with questions, that has to do with analyzing, interpreting data, using mathematics and computational thinking, and engaging in argument from evidence. And then the last one is developing and using models, constructing explanations, and designing solutions. So as you're looking at the data that is reported as a result of the LEAP, when you're looking at these different reporting categories, you can actually look at them through the lens of the SCPs. And then from there, you can say, what SCPs do my students maybe need more support in when helping prepare them for the LEAP? You can also obviously see we've got the standards there as well, but sometimes the SCPs give a more overarching approach of how to support your students. The next thing I want to talk about is the LEAP Science cut scores. Now, as you get the results, you're going to get a certain percentage of students who are advanced, certain percentage of students who are at mastery, basic, approaching basic, and unsatisfactory. Now, obviously, we want to be able to get our students to that mastery level. But what does that mean when I'm trying to prepare my students for the LEAP? What are we aiming for when we're talking about mastery? Here at InterOrbit, what we've done is we've taken these cut scores and we've tried to translate them into a percentage that more fits in with what we're used to as educators. So how we did that is we looked at the minimum score that students can get on the LEAP science test, a 650. And then the highest score they could get is an 850, which means there's about 200 points available for students to earn on the LEAP. Now, in order to get to that mastery level, the minimum amount of points they have to earn for grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 is 750. So 100 points. So out of the 200 available, students need to earn 100 of those points to get to that mastery level. Do the math. Proficiency is at about 50%. Now, I don't know about you, but when I see 50%, my teacher brain automatically goes, that's failing. That's not so good. And that makes sense given the ABCD scale that we usually work with. But if we kind of translate that into these cut scores, proficiency is 50%. So if you're giving students these rigorous 3-dimensional and 2-dimensional LEAP-like questions that are phenomena-based, if students are getting about half of them right, they're on track. So as you're doing this LEAP preparation, try to keep in mind this different range for proficiency and what we're trying to aim to get our students to do. We don't need to hold them to the same standards that we traditionally do with that A through F grading scale. And this is true for the biology as well. So maximum is 850, minimum 650. To get mastery, they need 750. We're at that 50% again for the high school biology. So that same level is going to be the same for all of the LEAP science tests. The next thing I want to talk about is the different the answer key on the LEAP and how you can tell what's being assessed within the questions on the LEAP. So as I'm looking at the LEAP answer key here, when you see the set there, that's going to be the phenomena. So when it's talking about those item sets, there's going to be a set of questions that are all about Hawaiian volcanoes. So that's the phenomena that those questions are going to be about. The individual number is like the question number. So like these 4 questions here are all about volcanoes. And then you're going to see the alignment to the NGSS and the standards over on the side. So for this question is going to be assessing the SCP, the DCI, and the cross-cutting concept. That means this is a 3-dimensional question. So students are going to need to utilize all 3 dimensions of the standard in order to answer this question. Now, the next question just has a DCI and a cross-cutting concept, which means this is going to be a 2-dimensional question. So students are only going to be utilizing 2 dimensions to try to answer this question. Then we have another 3-dimensional, and then we have a 2-dimensional, but this time with the SCP. Long story short, on the LEAP science tests, students are going to be asked 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional questions. So what this means is we really need to move beyond just assessing our students on content. So with every question, students are either going to need to use an SCP and a skill or look at that overarching cross-cutting concept. And for a lot, they're going to have to do them all. So to make sure that they're prepared, they need to see phenomena-based questions that utilize all the dimensions beyond just content. So to show you what that looks like here, I pulled an example item from the 7th grade practice test to show you how the 3 dimensions are interwoven within different LEAP items and how students need to utilize them. So this particular question I pulled deals with zebra mussels, and it is a TPD question, which means it is a 2-part dependent question. Multiple choice, multiple choice. So it's 2 multiple choice questions, but they have to get the first question right in order to get the second one right. This is looking at MSLS 2.4. The SEP is all about engaging in argument from evidence. The DCI is all about ecosystems, dynamics and functioning and resilience. And the cross-cutting concept is stability and change. So all 3 dimensions are going to be utilized within this item. Another thing I wanted to point out is the PLDs, or the performance level descriptors, for the LEAP science test as well. So these are written in a way to say exactly how students need to use the 3 dimensions in order to earn that level 4 of mastery. And what I want to point out here is they still need to use all 3 dimensions in order to get to that mastery. So they need to construct an argument supported by empirical evidence. And as you can see in the standard, they need to construct an argument supported by empirical evidence. We need to talk about how things change. That's that cross-cutting concept of stability and change, about the physical or biological components of an ecosystem and how it affects a population. So those level 4 masteries are really based off of the 3 dimensions already embedded within the standard. So if we're looking at the standard, and if we're assessing students on all 3 dimensions of the standard, we are helping them get to that level 4 mastery. So keeping all this in mind, let's go ahead and actually look at the item. So like I mentioned, the phenomena is zebra mussels. So students have some text to read about zebra mussels and how they are an invasive species and how they have come into the Great Lakes. We've got some graphs tracking them within different Midwest states. We've got a food web. We've got graphs and charts. And this is what students need to keep going back to reference in order to answer all of those different questions. This is a lot of information to parse through and to dig through. Now, for the sake of space on the screen, I just pulled, oh, not yet. I'll show you that in a minute. What I want to show you before that is this. This is the question. Remember, this is a 2-part dependent. So it's a 2-part question and they have to get the first one right in order to get the second one right. So part A is, which conclusion about the spread of zebra mussels in different waterways is most supported by the evidence in graph 1? And then which fact from the stimulus best explains the answer to part A? I got a bad feeling about this, Chewy. I'm the one who put the Star Wars gifts in. There's a few more. I hope you're okay with it. This is a lot. Remember, they have all of this stimulus, all of this phenomena to answer these questions here. It's a lot, but if we work on supporting students with the 3 dimensions over time, these start to get less intimidating. So let's see exactly how the 3 dimensions are actually at play here. You're going to notice right now when we go ahead and try to answer the questions over what 3 dimensions are within the question and how they're played, I took away some of the stimulus. I did that because not all of the stimulus is necessary to answer these 2 questions. Our students, unfortunately, do not have this luxury, but there's only so much space on a screen. So as a reminder, the 3 dimensions that are at play within this item is the SEP, engaging in argument from evidence, the the DCI about ecosystem dynamics, and the cross-cutting concept about stability and change. So let's see how students would need to use these three dimensions in order to tackle this question. We're first going to focus on the SCP, engaging an argument from evidence. The SCP comes into play into this item because it's asking which conclusion is most supported by the evidence in graph 1. So if they need to engage an argument from evidence, they have to come up with a conclusion that is most supported by evidence presented in the graph. Also, they need to continue to support this by looking for some facts and information that are actually in the stimulus. So this is a little bit more in depth, where not only do they have to reference evidence within the graph, they also have to elicit facts from the actual text and stimulus at the same time. So this is where the SCP is going to come into play. Now, the DCI is all about ecosystem dynamics. Essentially, disruptions to any physical or biological component of an ecosystem can lead to shifts in all of its populations. So in this case, we're talking about the fact that 100,000 zebra mussel eggs may potentially reach adulthood. So this idea from the stimulus that zebra mussels can lay a lot of eggs, leading to a lot of zebra mussels, and this huge influx in this population can then have a domino effect within the ecosystem. So this idea that zebra mussels can spread within different waterways because they are able to lay a lot of eggs and then increase their population really dramatically. So this idea that adding this new biological component of a zebra mussel can then affect other parts of that ecosystem. And then the cross-cutting concept is all about stability and change. Now, in this particular item, the cross-cutting concept and the DCI are pretty similar, but it's this idea that zebra mussels can rapidly spread into other waterways. So stability and change is all about how things can remain really stable over a long period of time, or they can shift over time. So this is this idea of how we can look at this graph and see this dramatic increase in zebra mussels because they are reaching into different waterways due to the fact that they are laying so many eggs at a time. So that's a tricky question for students to be able to answer. But we at InterOrbit have developed a questioning strategy that can help students scaffold up to be able to answer rigorous three-dimensional questions like the one we just looked at. And really the challenge here is, at least from my perspective, is the shift of going from just teaching content to trying to teach three-dimensionally. So we can't just give students a lot of information and content. We need to be able to have them incorporate all those dimensions. And while it's tricky, as Han Solo said, never tell me the odds, because we can make it happen. We've done this by writing different types of questions on our site that slowly scaffold in rigor in order to get students to eventually use all three dimensions at once. The first type of question that you're going to find on our site is a one-dimensional question. These are DCI only or content only questions. Now, we do need to move beyond one-dimensional questions, but we start here because if students don't understand ecosystems and how different populations can affect one another, we can't really start constructing arguments from evidence about that. So this gives us a chance to make sure our students actually understand the core content before we start layering in the other dimensions, which is where our two-dimensional questions come in. Our two-dimensional questions still have students responsible for the content and the DCI, but we layer in either the cross-cutting concept or the SCP one at a time. This gives students a chance to flex these individual dimensions independently, and it also gives some really interesting incremental data to see what you might need to specifically help support students with before they start tackling three-dimensional questions. Now, the NGSS considers proficiency once students can actually use all three dimensions at the same time with a novel phenomena, which is exactly how the LEAP is structured, with these item sets centered around a phenomena with mostly three-dimensional questions. But slowly progressing from 1D to 2D to 3D can help students slowly build the confidence to answer three-dimensional questions and give you detailed information along the way to see how you can help them. I want to show you an example of what this could actually look like in practice with an example of these scaffolded questions from InterOrbit. So we're going to be looking at a phenomena cluster set on the same standard that we just looked at with that LEAP item. So MSLS24. So the SCP about engaging an argument from evidence, ecosystems, and stability and change. The phenomena in this case is about these Asian carp and how they're given eerie feeling as they are in Lake Erie. So given this phenomena, and given the fact that we are assessing MSLS24, here is a question that is on InterOrbit. Asian carp are known to outcompete native fish for resources. What is the likely outcome of this competition? So knowing this is a question on inner orbit, I'm curious, do you have an idea if you think this would be labeled a 1D, a 2D, or a 3D question? So in order to answer this question, do students need to use one of the dimensions, two of them, or three of them? Go ahead and answer in the poll and let's see what we've got. This is a one-dimensional question. Now, if you said two-dimensional, totally the cross-cutting concept in the DCI definitely have some layering components here for sure. But the idea here is we're looking at this idea of introducing Asian carp, which is not a native species, and how it's going to affect the population of native species. So this idea of those ecosystem dynamics. So the purpose of this question is, okay, do students understand how different dynamics within ecosystems can affect one another? So we're looking at the exact same phenomena here with the Asian carp within Lake Erie. But here's another question. Which argument below is accurate based on the evidence in figure 2? I'm going to ask the same question. What do you think? Is this 1D, 2D, or 3D? So what dimensions do students need to use in order to answer this question? This is a two-dimensional question, specifically with the SEP. As you can see, it starts off with which argument below is accurate, which is using the SEP, engaging an argument from evidence. So this helps students, again, to start to incrementally see, okay, I have evidence over here in figure 2. I've got this graph. So which one of these arguments is supported by my graph? Which one of these are connected? So this helps students practice that skill. Another question for you. Refer to figure 1. Which of these populations will likely decline the most if Asian carp entered this ecosystem? Again, do you think this is a 1D, a 2D, or a 3D question? This is a 2D question, but this time with the cross-cutting concept. We're not asking students to do anything about gathering evidence or like engaging an argument. In this case, we're just looking at this idea of stability and change. So which one of these populations will decline? Which one of these will change? How will this ecosystem be disrupted by entering in this invasive species? Another question for you. Based on the evidence in figures 1 and 2, which best explains why an increase in Asian carp may not have a negative effect on the yellow perch population? So do you think this is 1D? 2D is three-dimensional. So in this one, they need to look at evidence, and then which one of these best explains the evidence that they have within the phenomena. And then we're talking about how we're affecting a population, how we're changing a population or not changing a population and keeping it stable. So in this case, we have to look at those ecosystem dynamics, stability and change, and also engaging an argument from evidence. And we can even take this a step farther. Is this a 1D, 2D, or 3D question? Its short answer, it's three-dimensional. In this case, that last question was multiple choice. So students were able to see some ideas and maybe do some process of elimination. But now with this question, they're on their own. So they need to gather their own evidence from the phenomena, and then they need to see if they agree with this argument that is being made within the prompt. So remember, all these questions were pulled from inner orbit. And these questions are pulled and they can be structured in an assessment to slowly scaffold students up to answer those three-dimensional questions more confidently. By starting off with one-dimensional questions, we can see if our students understand the core content that is being delivered. From there, we can give two-dimensional questions. So they can layer in the cross-cutting concept and see the overarching big idea. And then we can give them the two-dimensional SEP and see if they can apply the skill to that content. From there, we can combine these into a three-dimensional question. If you kind of look at the 2D CCC and the 2D SEP here, we're talking about affecting that population and which one's going to decline, and then looking at argument from evidence. This three-dimensional question kind of nicely jumbles those two together by looking at evidence and talking about the yellow perch population. And then from here, we can scaffold this even further and then eventually let them try it on their own in this free response question. So without the help of the multiple choice, can they now present that on their own? By building assessments in this way, 1, you're giving students the opportunities to eventually build to that three-dimensional rigor, and 2, you're getting really detailed data along the way to see where students may need support before they can hit that three-dimensional question confidently. Now, before I show you the data, I did want to take a minute and come back to these PLDs because we want to make sure that we are giving our students questions that are at the mastery level that we're looking for on that LEAP science test. So for the mastery level, students need to construct an argument supported by empirical evidence, If you look here, based on the evidence, which best explains essentially the argument of what's going to have a negative effect on the yellow perch population. We've got those 3 different dimensions at play in level 4 mastery and we have those three different dimensions at play in this multiple choice question. So at least to me, these two feel like a similar rigor. Now, the nice thing is this level 5 advanced, students have to evaluate an argument. If you look at this short answer question here, we need to decide as a student, do we agree with the argument given? AKA evaluating the argument. So you even have an opportunity with some of the inner orbit questions to go beyond that mastery to ensure that you're really getting them confident before they're going into that LEAP science test. Now, let's say you're interested in trying this out. Our site makes it really easy to find and build these scaffolded formative assessments. So let's say you are teaching the 8th grade Amplify curriculum and you're on your natural selection unit and you just got done covering MSLS 4.4. You can go onto our site. You can click Amplify, you can click Middle School, you can click 8th grade. And look, there's that natural selection unit that you're currently teaching. From there, you can click our formative button, and you're going to go ahead and find pre-made scaffolded formative assessments that are going to go in that same flow that we just talked about, 1D, 2D, 3D. You'll get a nice snapshot of how your students are doing and progressing through those dimensions, and also giving them exposure to phenomena-based three-dimensional questions as well. And then you get really detailed data, which I keep mentioning. Before we dive into what that data looks like, I do want to give another opportunity to see if you may be interested in trying out Inner Orbit and actually piloting this. So Julia is dropping in the chat a link. This is an interest form. It's just letting us know that you're interested in potentially learning more about Inner Orbit and how it could help support you and your students, whether it's prepping for the LEAP or anything else that you may need. Now, without further ado, let's talk about that data. I'm going to pass it back over to Daniel.
Thanks, Emily. Well, as we all know in science, data is everything. So let's take a look at what the data can look like and the insights it provides when you give an assessment on inner orbit. Because all inner orbit summative items are 2 or 3 dimensional, every question includes either a science and engineering practice, a cross-cutting concept, or both, just like on the LEAP. This allows teachers and admin to look beyond missed standards and actually identify patterns across schools, students, classrooms, and schools. The dimensions report here provides the insights by showing performance across the specific elements of each of the 3 dimensions and allowing you to drill down by grade, school, and class. This helps you target instruction, support learning across multiple performance expectations, and better align your preparation for state assessments like the LEAP science test. Now let's zoom out to a district level view. This is one of my favorite reports because it really highlights why looking at the science and engineering practices and cross-cutting concepts is so powerful. Across the top, you can see the different dimensions, and down the side, you have the different schools in the district, and in the table, you can see the performance across the district. In this example, you can quickly see differences between schools such as School 2 struggling with the SEP of constructing explanations and designing solutions, while School 5 is performing much better in that same area. That easy contrast opens the door for meaningful collaboration, allowing educators to ask what's working in one school and how those strategies can be shared across the district. Now let's zoom into the teacher level view and look at student performance on individual questions. So in this example, we can see that students tend to do well on the 1D DCI only questions and continue to perform strongly on the 2D question where a cross-cutting concept is added. However, we begin to see a drop when the science and engineering practice is introduced in the other 2D question, and an even larger drop when all 3 dimensions are included in the last question. Because that same SEP appears in both the 2D and 3D questions, we can identify that as a key area where students need more targeted support, rather than unnecessarily reviewing the DCI that they're already doing well on. That's the real power of this data. It helps us move beyond just what students missed to focusing on why it was missed, so that instruction can be adjusted with intention. While assessment is a crucial component of helping students prepare for the LEAP, Inner Orbit also created some more informal sense-making activities to help students practice. I want to share one of those activities with you called the Science Talks that help students with targeting these supports in the classroom and it can be implemented right away. In this Science Talks activity, students engage in a facilitated discussion around a novel phenomena, exploring questions, sharing ideas, and collaboratively building understanding. Teachers would select a phenomena from our library, and students will work together to unpack it using all 3 dimensions while they collaborate to highlight the bigger patterns or relationships they notice. It's important to note that this activity is a scaffolded support and not another test. So once teachers see data that shows students are struggling with 3D questions, the next step could be to provide this type of structured sense-making practice in the classroom. And teachers can run science talks at any point of the year to help students become more comfortable making sense of phenomena out loud and together. By practicing this way, when students encounter a 3D question or an assessment like the LEAP, it doesn't feel like an entirely new task. Instead, it's the same kind of thinking they've been practicing in class. These science talks promote collaborative sense-making and help students ask better questions and connect their prior knowledge to new concepts as they get prepared for the leap. This can be a great informal first step to test prep and can be implemented right away. All right, that's all we have planned for today. I'm going to pass it off to Emily to wrap up the webinar.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So just to highlight some of the key things that we discussed. So we wanted to help explain the structure and the expectations of the LEAP science test and also talk about how the 3 different dimensions of the NGSS are woven within LEAP items and how we can scaffold students to eventually answer those rigorous questions. Keep in mind, on the LEAP science test, students are going to be asked only 2D and 3D questions. So we really need to move beyond content and make sure we're supporting them with the SEPs and the CCCs to be able to answer those LEAP items. Next, when we're thinking about supporting students for the LEAP, remember that the proficiency cut score is at about 50%. So we're really looking for students to only get about half of these questions right in order to get to that mastery level. So thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. It's been a pleasure. If you're interested in learning more about Inner Orbit or potentially piloting it with your students, please feel free to fill out the interest form in the chat. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel at Inner Orbit NGSS. We post a ton of videos and helpful tips like we did today with this webinar. And you are also able to email us at inquiries@innerorbit.com with any questions you may have. And as Han Solo said, may the force be with you all. Thank you again for being with us here this afternoon. If you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you.